If you have been watching the last 3 weeks of Shabbat Night Live, you know that we have been connecting the dots with all of the pictographs and things like this throughout history to show where the Israelites came from, and more importantly, where the Hebrew written language came from. And we've been showing that. But one thing, Dr. Majls Džons, I want to know is, okay, so we have these Hebrew Gospels that we have talked about before in another series. But how do we really know that this was not translated to some other language and then, oh yeah, we forgot to, let's go back to Hebrew and put it back in Hebrew? How do we know that these are from the original and never translated to other languages first?
That's a really good question. And the answer to that, the short answer is we have the markers of the Hebrew manuscript tradition. Things that are in the Hebrew Gospels that are not in the other Gospels. And we'll talk about that. But I think the pertinent question right now is, what does that have to do with the Exodus? Remember, basically, we talked about this before. That is Jehovah's major intervention on behalf of his people, is the Sinai covenant. It is the foundation of the Bible. And so if that foundation is false, you're building an edifice of religion upon sand. Right? So we went through, that's why the evidence of the Exodus is so important. So we went through and proved it and showed it with scientific evidence, connected the dots. This happened. We have the evidence. All right? And it happened at the time the Bible said it did, which was 15th century, 1446, entering into the conquest about 1400. We now have the evidence to prove all of these things. But you remember that it was during the Exodus that Jehovah prophesied to Moses, there will be another. I will choose another like unto you, Moses.
Right.
And I will put the things I want him to say, and he will say all the things I want him to say. So they're prophesying the coming of the king.
So we have to have our foundation in Exodus first before we ever have a Messiah.
Yes, we do. And Jeshua based his authority on the Exodus. He did. He based his authority on the law given at Sinai. He said, not a yod or a tittle shall pass from the law until all be fulfilled. I have not come to destroy the Torah or the prophets, which is very interesting because I was listening to a religious broadcast this morning that said the law is dead. Well, according to who? Not according to Jeshua. Some things have been abrogated.
How can you listen to those? I just turn those off.
Well, usually they're good. but he got to this one and said, "What? He's erasing the Torah from the Bible." You know, it creates a schizophrenic church. You know, they're trying to push the Hebrew Messiah away and embrace the Greek Jesus. You know, because then this is the same historical person. Come on, let's get real here. It's the same person, right? But you have a Hebrew Messiah who upholds Torah. And you have a Greek Jesus who is said to have done away with it. Now that's totally contradictory. This is called an archetype. Our perception of who that person is, what his purpose is, and what his goals are, right? And so you've created this totally different thing, right, between the two. And that doesn't work. You've got to resolve those issues, you know, and Jeshua had no problem resolving it. He said, people will come to me and say, Lord, Lord, have we not expelled demons in your name and done great wonders and healed and done great wonders in your name? And I will be forced to profess to them, I don't know you. Get away from me, you who are without Torah.
The workers of anomia.
Yeah. So how do we know that? We know that from the Hebrew Gospels, because the names of God, the names of his son Yeshua, Yehovah, Yeshua, the words like Torah and menorah have been translated out of the Bible, being translated in other words which are more ambiguous, right? So if Yeshua is saying, I don't know you, you are not a keeper of Torah, I don't know you, doesn't that put a kink in your thing that the law has been expelled? So you become oftentimes, not always, I mean, a lot of people, you know, have a very deep appreciation of Yehovah and his laws and don't think we've canceled the 10 Commandments, you know, because Yeshua came, now the 10 Commandments are no longer relevant. But he puts an end to that argument, doesn't he? You know, according to him. So what happens? It's in the Hebrew Gospels. That's how we know. A lot of things are in the Hebrew Gospels. We have the markers of the Hebrew Gospels, and that's what we're going to look at now. What are those markers? Okay, one of them is, of course, the names of God and the name of the Messiah. The name of Yehovah and his son, Yeshua the Messiah. They're in Hebrew in the Hebrew Gospels, right? And we have, so for example, in the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia, the first ones I translated, it says Yeshua's Mashiach, Yeshua's Mashiach. In the Shem Tov manuscript, it says Ješue, and in the Rumont Bible, which is a Waldensian Bible, that's actually translated, the Hebrew Gospels translated into Rumont, one of the early European languages, it says Yeshua. So that's one of the first things you look for, the name of God and the name of his son, and then words like Torah and menorah. There are other words, but those are the things you look at. So let's look at some of these, shall we?
So these markers are basically things that are words that are consistent throughout these, throughout
Fairly
the
consistent, yes, throughout the Hebrew manuscript. It may not have all the markers, but if it has more than one, it's probably either from that tradition or been influenced by it.
Okay.
But you're certainly not going to find them in the Greek manuscripts.
So in the same way we look at Mount Sinai, well, there's Mount Sinai, there's the split rock, there's the drawings of the cows on the sides of the golden, this must be the place.
They're landmarks, right. And they're mentioned in Scripture, the landmarks. So what we have are things that are mentioned in the Hebrew Gospels, but not in the Greek Gospels. Now, folks, the Hebrew Gospels, it's the same gospel story. It's nothing that's going to shake anybody's faith, or it shouldn't. But the thing that you get, there are some significant differences, yes, but they have to do with, doctrinal things. But they're... It's the same story. Yeshua is still the Son of God. He's still our Messiah. So
that's what we tell.
Don't get all agitated about this. It's perfectly what you do get is you get a Hebrew perspective of the story, and not understandably you get. From the Greek Gospels, you get a Greek perspective.
Right.
Everything we know about our Hebrew Messiah comes to us through the filter of Greek language, culture, and thought. And excuse it.
Yeah, I tell friends of ours who are just, Sunday-going Christians. They often ask us about why we believe what we believe. We say, we believe the same thing you do. Like you just said, it doesn't change your faith, but all those things that you glaze over and kind of shake your head going, I don't know what that means in my Bible.
Why are we practicing different, why are we doing different feast days than the ones that are commanded in the Bible?
Why did Jesus say that? Well, I don't understand. I'll just keep moving on. Here, when you look at it from a Hebrew perspective, you begin to give some definition to those glazed over areas that you didn't understand before. Right. That's all. It doesn't change what's in.
There's a lot of things that don't compute because of this basically transformation of the Bible into a Greek doctrine, right?
Yep.
And some of the things,
even their idioms don't make sense in Greek because it's something they said in Hebrew all the time.
And we'll look at some of those. We'll look at some of those because they're really significant. This is the Paris manuscript, one of our new manuscripts. I was about to tell you that, and if you go on our website, writingofgod.com, writingofgod.com, you can pick up for free a PDF, the Hebrew Gospels, Do They Exist? And it will give you a rundown of some of these manuscripts, because at the time we wrote that, there were like 15 extant manuscripts of the Hebrew Gospels. So I went to Europe. I knew I had 3 already. I knew there must be more. So I prayed about it, and I got permission to go to Europe, and found, like the first day, I found 5 more manuscripts of the Hebrew Gospels at the Cambridge Library.
Not a bad day.
Yeah, not a bad day at the office there, right? Okay, but now... this is another scoop, folks. I actually predicted this. I won't say prophesied, but I predicted that as soon as the cat was out of the bag and these libraries and museums knew of the existence of the Hebrew Gospels, because everyone presumes that it's a translation from Latin or Greek. And that was actually your question. How do we know it's not? And we're going to talk about that. But that it happened exactly the way I said it would. Once the cat is out of the bag, and the Vatican has led the way in this, to their credit. I got my original manuscript from them, and I've seen others since then. I've been to the Vatican again and seen other manuscripts there. But they have started to blossom like flowers in the spring. We are now tracking 80 manuscripts of the Hebrew Gospels, 80.
Wow.
Yeah, and like half a dozen of them are the complete, I didn't know that we'd find this, complete manuscript of the Brit Hadashah,
Really?
Yes, it's the New Testament in Hebrew. It's actually called the Renewed Covenant in Hebrew. So you got the Old Covenant and you got the Renewed Covenant. In Greek, it's the Old Testament and the New Testament. What's the difference? A testament is not a covenant. A covenant is a contract between us and God. He says, if you do this, this, and this, I'll do this, this, and this for you. Right? The Jews got that, right? Right? And he created wonders through them. They got it. They educated their children. And he says, I will do marvels with you among all the people that you are with, that you're living with. And everyone will see the things that I've done with you. And that's exactly what's happening, right? I mean, for as long as we've had the Nobel Prizes, for example, they've been cleaning up, haven't they?
Yes.
You know, it's like they're a tiny percent of the world's population, less than 1%. You know, and yet they get 20% of all the Nobel Prizes, right? Hebrews, not necessarily Israelis, but Hebrews, right, all over. In the United States, they're less than 2% of the population, and of all Americans that have received the Nobel Prize, 40% have been
American
Hebrew,
Jews.
American Jews. And so obviously they got it. They got it, the covenant from Sinai. It's a teaching covenant, right? You'll teach the word and the writing of God. And they got it. And they've been expert in every area, every profession. Well, that covenant is not just for them. It's not a racial thing. It's for anyone who wants to walk in covenant with Jehovah. He'll give you the same blessing, exact same blessing, right? So it's not about races. It's not about only the rich kids get to do it, you know? Everybody will be given the keys to the kingdom of knowledge. And so that's why it's so important. The Hebrew gospel is so important because it gets you back on the Hebrew track that they got and so many people didn't. We copied the Greek model, obviously, which is basically comes out of the pagan template, right? In any case.
So now, let me go back to something you said here, though.
Yeah.
So the 80 editions of the Hebrew Gospels, now this is not just the Gospels. You said the entire Brit Hadashah?
Yeah,
so all the
epistles? With all the epistles.
Really? Right up to Revelation?
Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts,
Romans,
all
Corinthians,
the epistles, every
Galatians,
single one of them,
Ephesians.
and Revelation, all of them.
Wow.
We've got 6 copies of them. Now, we have not, my team is much less than 80, so we haven't had a chance to evaluate all of these and ascertain if they are authentic or if they are translations. So we'll have to do that. But I never assume they are until I have verified it.
Right. Now, how long ago was that discovered? This is the first I've heard of it from you. So.
They've been coming in on a regular basis, and a lot of it has to do with the public knowledge that has gone through Shabbat Night Live out there to the world, right?
Well, we're happy to have played a part. This is great. It's wonderful.
Really, it's important. You know, they've started to look at these manuscripts again and say, well, maybe there was something, right? And now you can get these, and we've obtained many of them. And that's what we do, and people donate to us. We use that money to purchase these. So
you can literally purchase them. They're not locked in.
Our volunteers, we have a team of like 40, volunteers that are working on these manuscripts, transcribing and translating, doing a wonderful, wonderful job. But they're all volunteers. But it still costs us money to get these because they're rather expensive.
So they're not locked away in a museum where you cannot purchase them. They're actually available for purchase if you wanted them.
Yes.
Wow.
Some are. Some you have to get,
They're locked away in the
special
Vatican or
permissions or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've gotten a lot of them, and we're busy authenticating them and transcribing, and we're compiling the Hebrew Gospels from all of the relevant manuscripts that are out there.
Okay. Terrific.
And we'll have some new ones coming out.
Well, thank you for letting me disturb your thought here. Go ahead.
No, that's good. But we're tracking 80, and that's really important. So let me show you one of the markers. Okay, this is called Pernamosia, and this is one of the. In Matthew 1:21, it says, "And you shall call his name Yeshua, for he will save his people." Now in Hebrew, that is, you should call his name Yeshua, for he will Yoshia his people. It comes from the same root. Yeshua means salvation. Okay, so there's a little vowel change there, but it's the same root, and it gives it an internal rhyme, a matching of sound.
No, it makes sense.
It's very, very Hebraic prose, what it is, like internal rhyme. Okay, so that's Pernamosia, and we see that in this new manuscript here at the John 134 in the Cambridge manuscript, 132, one of the manuscripts that I found when I went there. So you have this phrase here, the Ruach Tenuach. The Ruach Tenuach. It means the Spirit, the Ruach, resting on this person. You shall know who they are when you see the Spirit resting upon them, descend upon them.
Is that another example of the prose? I noticed that the rhyming there.
Yes, the internal rhyme. So that indicates a certain authenticity to this manuscript, because Greeks don't write like that. And when you translate Hebrew into Greek, usually all the paranomosia, the internal rhyme, is lost.
Yeah, right.
Right.
You're not going to get that.
Almost always. So these are the things you look for. You look for idioms, you look for internal rhyme, and you look for these markers primarily. Right? One of the things that's proven to be very important are the prefaces, because the preface often will say it was originally written in Hebrew. Right? The Greek Gospels never say that, right? But St. Jerome translated them from Hebrew into Latin and Greek, and he wrote prefaces that have been widely used. So Jerome says they're originally written in Hebrew, although he translated them into Greek and Latin. This is Matthew. This is about Matthew. And probably Matthew and Luke were kind of glommed together into one book because they didn't put their names on them. They were written anonymously. We know them by the testimony of the early church fathers. So here it says, Luke was from Syria and dwelt in Antioch. He was a great doctor of the art, and after he became a disciple of the apostles, did not separate from the company of St. Paul, the gospel was already written for those in Judea. So it's already written for those in Judea, and that would have been in Hebrew. They were not Greek speakers. They were not Greek speakers. Let me say that again in case you missed it. They were not Greek speakers. They spoke Hebrew and Aramaic, and Hebrew was their religious language, so they spoke that. But they spoke Hebrew as well as Aramaic, so it was already written for them in Judea. In Matthew, it says the first evangelist wrote this in the Holy Tongue. The Holy Tongue is Hebrew. It's not Greek. It's not Greek.
It's certainly not
so
Greek.
He's saying he wrote it in Hebrew. The first evangelist wrote this in the Holy Tongue from memory to his brothers. So that's mentioned. And in the Rumant Bible, it mentions that it was originally written in Hebrew. So look at the preface first. Does it say it's written in Hebrew?
Never ignore the foreword.
Originally written in Hebrew, yes. So why should you doubt it when they say it?
Wow.
So that's one of the markers. That's an important one. This one says, Vermont Bible, John 1, in the beginning. I know you can't read that, but I can actually. I translated this. Okay, in the Vermont Book of John, down here at the bottom, it says, in the beginning was the Son, and the Son was with God, and the Son was God. Now, theologically, the Word and the Son are considered synonyms, so it doesn't break any theological rules.
Right.
But it is a marker of the Hebrew Gospels. In the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia, look in the middle there. It says, in the beginning was the Son, Eloah, and the Son of El was with El. Practically the same. But in others, it says exactly the same. So that is a marker of the Hebrew Gospels, that instead of in the beginning was the Word, in the beginning was the Son. All right, that is a marker. So here's another one. Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia. Now, Epiphanius said, he was considered the first church historian. He was a Jewish Christian, and he wrote in like the 3rd century, 4th century. He said, and he's speaking of the Hebrew Gospels, and he could read Hebrew, he could read the Hebrew Gospels. He says, their Hebrew Gospels begins like this. In the days when Herod was king of Judea. Okay, well, that's not Matthew, that's in Luke. So it's a direct quote. So he'd obviously read the Luke was originally written in Hebrew. Later on, it was translated into Greek, and it was like doubled in size, so it's kind of a hybrid. Because they added a bunch more to it. But part of what they added was what's called the prologue to Luke, the first 4 verses. Right now, in the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia, what happened to Luke? What happened to the verses 1 through 4?
Well, hold that thought. let's get to that after the break.
All right.
We're going to find out what happened to verses 1 through 4 of Luke.
Luke 1 through 4, the prologue. What happened to it?
All right. We're going to find out right after this. We're going to take a couple of minutes break to thank you, first of all, for making Shabbat Night Live possible, for donating to this ministry. It also helps others to see this into the future because we can't keep going without funding. So thank you for doing it. We like to pay it forward here at Shabbat Night Live. We hope you do too. So thank you very much. And we'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. We'll be right back. I hold in my hand the list of the 80 Hebrew manuscripts of the New Testament. The first 6 at the top, Dr. Majls Džons, are a complete New Testament.
The complete New Testament, everything.
And now
the
that
Gospels, Acts, the Epistles, Revelation, everything.
Now that would include, of course, Luke. And before the break, we were talking about what happened to the first 4 verses of Luke. What happened here?
We're talking about the markers of the Hebrew Gospels. So, because the first thing we're going to do is go look at the markers and see if this could be possibly of Hebrew origin. Because you don't know necessarily just because you've gotten Hebrew. There are certainly translations. That does not include any of them that we know are translations, like the Delits or the Covenant. But what happened to Mark? What happened to Luke 1 through 4? Because Epiphanius, the earliest church historian, said it begins in the days when Herod was king of Judea, right? Yeah. Well, there are 4 verses that come before that in your Bible. You can look at them right now if you want. But what they say in the Hebrew Gospels, the first 4 verses are missing. So guess what? It starts with verse 5, which reads, in the days when Herod was king of Judea. Exactly like Epiphanius said in the 3rd century. He said that it was. That's what it says in the Hebrew Gospels. That's how it starts out. And this is how Luke starts out in the Hebrew Gospels, because they don't have the first 4 verses. Well, that's pretty exciting, because look, here's another manuscript. The Vatican EBR, that means Hebrew. The Vatican Hebrew manuscript number 530. Okay, now this is the one that Nehemiah found at the Vatican. It's a fragment. It's a big, like 11 by 17. It's got 4 pages on it. It's part of a choir. So it was part of a complete manuscript. Yes. But it happens to have the first page of Luke and the first page of John on it. Right? Okay. Because it was bound together with a bunch of others. So it's 4 pages, but it's got the first one of Luke, and there's a couple of really incredible things about it. One is that, of course, it does not have the first 4 verses of Luke, just like the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia does not have the first 4 verses.
So these first 4 verses are not something missing from the Hebrew. They're additions from the Greek.
They were added into the Greek Gospel when they translated it into Greek and enlarged it. And they put more material in it. And I'm not saying the Greek Gospel is not the sacred word. I certainly believe that it is, because all the things that were added in were good things we know to be accurate, but that's the thing. But here are the first 4 verses. For as many have taken in hand, that means they wrote, right? I set forth the narrative of those things which are most surely believed among us, even as they delivered them unto us. So he had them. The author had them, right? Who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word. Well, that's got to be the apostles, don't you think? It seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things, to write unto you a copy, so that you would know. That's what it says. It says it's a copy, that you might know the certainty of these things. So that's what they've added into the Greek Gospel. So if you've got 2, let's say if you've got two books, 2 Gospels of Luke, right? One of them says it's a copy, and the other one does not say it's a copy. Which one is most likely to be the original?
Yep.
The one that does not claim to be a copy, right? Yep. So that was added in by the Greeks, and there was more that was added in. Now, St. Jerome translated them, and he testified 4 times in writing. He was very enamored of them. He called Matthew the authentic fountainhead of the Word. So he's a lover of books. He wasn't so good with people, but he was a lover of books. The Gospel according to Hebrews that we've recently translated. Now in there and this is the core of the whole thing, in there he talked about 3 instances where the Hebrew Gospels were different than the Greek Gospels. They go back to the early church tradition, all right, at the crucifixion of Ješue. All right, there was an earthquake.
Right.
Darkness covered the temple, covered all of Jerusalem. There was an earthquake. And in the Greek Gospels, it said it tore the veil.
Yes, I know the story, yes.
Yeah, and that's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all right? Well, in the Hebrew Gospels, it doesn't mention the veil. It says it split the huge lintel stone above the Holy of Holies, and it fell. Well, think about that a little bit. What's hanging beneath that huge lintel stone?
Oh, that would be the veil is hanging from that, likely, yes.
So if the lintel stone split and fell, it would rend the veil in two. Okay, it's not a contradiction of what's in there, but it is a different perspective. You know, the Greeks focus on the tearing of the veil gives them direct access to Yehovah. They do not have to go through any Hebrew priest, which was important to them. They're declaring their independence, right? Sure. But to the Jewish Christian Messianics, the Messianics of the era, these people had walked in that temple, and it really was a wonder of the ancient world. It was an incredible building. That's why Herod was called Herod the Great, because of his building projects. So he built this magnificent temple. It's inlaid with gold, on the inside gold foil there. And to be honest with you, you know, it was demonized, because Herod was demonized. And this was and when Ješue, his apostles, his Talmudim, his students, were showing him the temple, and they were just like in awe of it. And Ješue was not impressed at all. He said, do you see this? Not one stone will be left against another. It's all going to be torn down. So Ješue himself, Daniel also, prophesied the total destruction of the temple, which happened 40 years later.
You know, even that the breaking of the lintel stone, just thinking of an earthquake, it makes more sense anyway, because how could everything else, you know, we see this in the movies about Ješue. The whole thing shakes, it's all still there, and yet the
curtain's flexible.
Curtain rips. Like, well, how's that?
It's not going to be ripped. It could be ripped by supernatural means, of course, or by a falling lintel stone that just broke it in half.
Just tore it in half. Yeah, exactly.
That could do it, but it's flexible. Other than by supernatural means, it wouldn't have been split. So it makes actually more sense, like you said, right? So you've got the breaking of the lintel, and that's what was mentioned in the Hebrew Gospel. So at this point, when I read that, you know, Yehovah took me at the hand. Now, come over here. Like a little imbecile child. Come over here, now check in the Hebrew Gospels and see what it says in those three places. So it's mentioned in Matthew 27:51, Mark 15:38, and Luke 23:45. Now we're going to look at these, right? Are you ready for this?
Go ahead, let's do this.
All right, so St. Jerome says, testimony, the earliest church tradition is what is written in the Hebrew Gospel. It's a huge lintel stone over the Holy of Holies. Because it had to be huge, because it's supporting more stones on top of it, right?
Right.
That was what was cracked. And it desecrated the temple. It desecrated the Holy of Holies. That was the testimony of Yehovah himself as to the death of his son, that it was his son. He desecrated the Holy of Holies and the Sanhedrin at the same time. Okay, so in the Gospel, however, which is composed in Hebrew, we read not that the temple curtain was torn, but that the temple lintel of wondrous size fell. So that's the inner temple. All right, so let's look at these. Now, here is the King James Version. All right, since most of you probably don't know Greek. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in two from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. The choice of word for rocks instead of stones, it's the same word, right? Makes you think it's not the stones of the temple, but some rocks out on the hillside or something.
Yes.
All right? But here you go in the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia, the HGC, and here the temple is broken on both sides. The temple itself was broken on both sides, up and down. And in other places it says up from the top to the bottom, from the front to the back. So the Holy of Holies, which was surrounded by a greater outer temple, was just cracked right down the middle. Both sides up and down, the earthquake, and the stones were split in the middle. All right, that's Matthew. That sounds like what Jerome said about the early church tradition of the Messianics that was written up in the Hebrew Gospels. And this is from the Hebrew Gospels, remember? Okay, and the first one I translated, the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia. So here's what it says in King James Version, and the veil of the temple was rent in two from the top to the bottom. All right, and in the Hebrew Gospel it says the temple was broken on both sides, up and down, the temple itself. And in Luke 23:45, and the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. In the Hebrew Gospels, and the sun went dark and covered the temple, and the temple was split in the middle. The stones of the temple were split, not the veil. No mention of a veil at all.
So three times in a row now, if I'm not mistaken, we're here about this split in the middle.
In the middle, from the top to the bottom, from the front to the back. I mean, the entire Holy of Holies was desecrated.
So not just like you said, not just a picture in your mind of these rocks on the hillside being rent or jostled. It's something splitting down the middle.
Yeah. So, the only way they were able to hide it is because it's in the inner temple, and nobody's allowed to go in there. Okay, so they could fill it in with plaster and hang a banner over it and keep the temple going, because it was a cash cow.
Right.
Fix the lintel well enough, because people weren't allowed in there anyway. All right. It wasn't recorded because who was in charge of recording? The Sadducee priests were in charge of recording. So they're going to put in the historic record what they want. But this was just 40 years after it was actually built, about 45 years after it was built, and already it's been desecrated. Nobody's going to bring the scam they're running with the goats. You bring a goat and say, well, this goat has a blemish, but for a fee, I'll give you a goat without blemish. We'll take this as a down payment. So they'd get a goat and the price of the goat. So
and then sell the goat.
Scam. Sure, and then provide the same goat to the next chunk. So they were fleecing the righteous, and the money changers. You could not give us a tithe money that had a pagan image on, like of the emperor.
Right.
So for a fee, we will provide you with money that does not have a pagan image on it. So again, they're making more money. Yeah. So they're making tons of money. They were cleaning up, to be honest, and they didn't want to endanger that. Okay, so I told you I went to find more Hebrew Gospels because I had convinced they were there, and I prayed about it, and God said, yeah, I told you to find the Hebrew Gospels, so go. So I went, and my wonderful people on my list, and listen, call up, get some free downloads. We have a lot of interesting things at the Writing of God, and you'll get on our list, and we'll send you research updates. But these wonderful people provided the money to go there and the money to buy these manuscripts. Okay, and the manuscripts were from Cambridge, but they were originally from Cochin, India, where St. Thomas went. And we have historical attestation that the Hebrew Gospels were carried there. Thomas carried them, I'm sure, but Barnabas also went to India and carried them with them, right? So we have historical assertion that this happened. And also you had someone come from Alexandria and bring a copy back, to Alexandria. So they were definitely there, and they have been preserved, and we have them, all right? So why don't we go look at those three verses again?
Okay. All
right, so we look at the three verses, and it says, here straight from the Cochin Gospels here, and suddenly, Matthew 27:51, and suddenly the face of the entry of the temple, it's the lintel stone, was split in two from the beginning until the end, and the earth shook, and the heavens were covered. All right? Again, the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia, and the temple was broken on both sides up and down, the earthquake, and the stone split in the middle. Even more precise that we're talking about the lintel, the stone at the entryway. Mark 15:38, from the Cochin, and the entry to the temple cracked after the start of the quake. The entry to the temple. So it's even more precise about it. The temple was broken on both sides up and down, and the final one, Luke 23:45. It was dark. Remember, it covered with darkness, and split the entry of the temple right down the middle. So exactly consistent with the verses in the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia. But remember, these two Gospels are 5,000 miles apart, and separated by 2,000 years. So how is there going to be any collaboration? Did he call him up and say, hey, change those three verses in there to to correspond with what we say. No, there's not. That's just not possible. These are both from the original Gospels. That's one of the.
So there's a common root to these two.
Yeah, and they are said to be from the earliest church tradition. It'd be the first century tradition.
Wow.
So we've got these two sets of the Hebrew Gospels, and they're separated by 2,000 years and 5,000 miles. Now here's some of a couple of our other manuscripts here. The Augsburg manuscript is one of 6 complete Brit Hadashahs, New Testaments, everything.
Okay.
Now what we know is this. Matthew and Luke were originally written in Hebrew. Now Luke was expanded, so it's kind of a hybrid. Mark and John, as far as we know, John could have been written earlier in Hebrew. It's hard to say. Mark was written in Greek, as far as we know. Acts is a good question, because if Luke was written in Hebrew originally, there was a 2-part letter to Theophilus, which actually means lover of God, so it may have been code, right? But anyway, there's still a 2-part letter. So Acts may have originally been written in Hebrew. We will find out. We have various manuscripts of Acts now that we're just getting to them. So we'll be able to do a linguistic analysis and determine whether we think it comes from an original Hebrew text. But the epistles of Paul were written in Greek, except for Hebrews. The letter to the Hebrews was written in Hebrew. We have historical attestation to that. Clement of Rome, I think, said that it was actually Luke who translated it from Hebrew into Greek. So Luke knew Hebrew and he knew Greek, which we knew. So he was Hebrew. He was a Hebrew. They say he's a Gentile, but he wasn't. He knew far too much about Judaism to be a Gentile. Okay, so it was Luke who translated Hebrews into Greek. Okay, but then all Hebrews and all of the ones at the back of the bus, they were written in Hebrew.
Hebrew, James, Peter, John, Jude, Revelation.
1st, 2nd, 3rd Peter, John. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, 1st, 2nd Peter, James and Jude, the brothers of Jesus, and Revelation. Now we'll be coming out with a publication on the epistles of Jeshua and his brothers, James and John. It's a very important document. Did you know that Jeshua had written
I was just going to say, wait a second, the epistle of Jeshua? Wait a second, what is that?
It's right there. It's right there in the first 2 chapters of Revelation.
Okay.
Yeah, he talks about sending letters to the 7 churches. Those are actual letters. They actually went to the churches.
Oh wow. Okay.
So they were really letters dictated by him. To
John.
To John, to the messengers, right? They're called the messengers to the 7 churches. It's the same word as angel. It's usually translated as angels, but he actually.
So this was not just written in Revelation. These became letters and went out?
They were letters, yeah. They went
wow,
out
okay.
And so people, because of that, people kind of overlooked the profound message in them.
Yeah, well, I did. Yeah. I didn't realize that.
And so you have James and Jude, which are phenomenally important. And then you also have James, the brother of Jesus, actually wrote a gospel of his own. It's called the proto-evangelion of James, which proto means before. So it really is about Jeshua. It's not about James. It's about Jeshua, his brother, before he even went into his ministry. And he's his brother. He's the one to speak of it. And it solves some really, really important doctrinal issues in the Bible. So, and I have judged it to be very authentic. So these are really important letters. So here's the Augsburg manuscript, the Freiburg manuscript. So did these have the markers? Some of them do. Like here in the Freiburg manuscript, you may remember when we talked about this, in the Hebrew Gospels, the Shem Tov manuscript, the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia, they said not the carpenter, that he was the son of the smith.
Yes.
That's right, which is napach in Hebrew. And so, frankly, having been a carpenter, I know that you do everything. You do everything.
You're carpenter, handyman.
Roofing, foundation, work, painting, sheetrock, everything. And so they would have done the same. So if you had to do nails or hinges, well, there's the forge, go make them.
Right.
So in Greek, he calls them the teknon, which is the builder. So it's probably a better definition. But we get used to him as a carpenter and think that's sacrosanct. Well, in the Freiburg manuscript, he's called a nagar, which is the smelter. It's a word akin to a smith. Okay, so that fits. It's also in the Lord's Prayer. You remember the Lord's Prayer? It's called the doxology, the end. For that is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. Nothing wrong with that. Theologically, those are all solidly part of Scripture. However, it was not in the Lord's Prayer in the earliest manuscripts, in the earliest Greek manuscripts. Okay, even it was not in there. It got added in because it became part of their liturgy. And some enterprising scribe said, oh, they forgot the doxology. I'll just add it in, right? But it's very popular, so it's stuck, But it never was a part of the Hebrew. They didn't do a liturgy like that.
Right. Michael has brought that out as well.
Right. So in the Hebrew, there is no doxology, that final line.
Now,
and so it'd be funny if you did see it.
Now we have another something else to talk about here, but we're out of time. So I wonder if you would come back and bless us with a love gift. Would you do that?
I would be happy to do that.
Okay. So we will keep our next secret subject here for a love gift.
I will.
And we'll keep it at that. So thank you for joining us, Miles. Really appreciate it. Anytime you come in.
It was my pleasure.
Always very enlightening and happy to hear that new folks are taking the torch to connect the dots to Exodus, as we were talking in our last 3 episodes. And it's exciting to hear from them and more exciting to hear from you, who's putting this all together and providing the background for them.
Right, and we'll need the new people that are coming in. We've got 80 manuscripts, and there'll be more.
Yep.
There's more in the East and in the areas that don't archive that well because they're poorer. Well, there's more to come, but it's a proven thing now that the Hebrew Gospels, they definitely exist in the Hebrew New Testament.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us. Thank you for joining us. It's been a wonderful series. Hope you've enjoyed it. And look for that love gift as well. Again, thanks for joining us on Shabbat Night Live. We'll see you next time. Shavua Tov.